Good morning, esteemed members of the committee. First and foremost, I wanted to go ahead and thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to present before you today. My name is Andre Houghton, and I'm going to be talking about my dissertation project. It is titled High Performing Young Educators Exodus to Charter Schools. So jumping right in, I want to go ahead and provide you with some background about who I am. I've spent the last 7 years working in education in various fields. I began as a Teach for America Corps member in 2010. I taught at Fondren Middle School in Southwest Houston for a couple of years. Then I moved over to Hogg Middle School in the Heights, continuing to teach 8th grade social studies. This past year, I moved over to a KIPP school. I wanted to know what it felt like to work in the charter movement. Awesome experience, built some networks over there. In addition to that, I've spent some time as well working on the teacher prep side. So for the past 5 summers, I've worked as a trainer in Teach for America, helping to prepare their incoming Corps members. I've also facilitated a few sessions to HISD's New Teacher Academy, and finally run a social studies department over at KIPP. I say all this to say that even though I've only been in education 7 years, I feel like I've experienced a lot, worked with a ton of different stakeholders as far as the field is concerned here in the city. My dream job, I want to continue working in education. I want to write books about education. I also want to be a consultant and help a lot of the school districts adapt to serving a demographic that is potentially more urban and has more at high risk or high need students. And then last but not least, I think future, maybe even being a professor. I would love to work with a new crop of young educators, people just entering the field. I think this gives a clear idea of who I am and also sort of provides a framework for why I chose to do the dissertation that I did. Now, in thinking about the educational landscape over the past couple years, one topic just always jumps to mind, and that is the topic of charter schools. This topic it brings up a lot of passion, both from the supporters as well as the detractors. And I think the story of charter schools is an extremely interesting one, right? Just in the past 15 years alone, we've gone from having 1.7% of our nation's students attending a charter school to over 6%, right? We went from 1,500 charter schools to over 6,000. And I would honestly say, I'd make this personal. In the next year alone, 5 of my close friends are actually going to be opening their own charter schools, right? So this growth is forecasted to continue for the near future. Now, when we think about charter schools, several other mini topics come up, right? Are charter schools legal? Are they effective? And who is staffing them? And the fact of the matter is, many of these new charter schools, they are staffed by young and effective teachers who have actually left traditional public school districts. This brings up another problem. As traditional school districts are already bracing for teacher vacancies, they are now potentially having the additional issue of losing some of their strongest and also rising up-and-coming stars. All the while, teacher prep programs are producing less graduates. So this is an issue, right? There's more charter schools, but traditional public schools have vacancies too. How do we rectify this? This was just something that I absolutely knew that I had to study. The chart is very clear, right? The growth is just, it's amazing, right? And so this presents, I think, new challenges that need to be explored. Now, there have been some studies that have started to address the bigger problem. For the most part, these studies can sort of be bucketed into 3 categories, right? We have teacher attrition, so why are teachers leaving the profession generally? As well as charter school effectiveness. Do they work? Which ones work? Why are they working? And then last but certainly not least, what are the professional implications, right? What is it like to work at a charter school? What types of curriculum control do educators have? At the same time, that literature does have some deficiencies. Most of those studies, they're addressing the issue of what it means to be a charter school, or talking about the benefits and drawbacks of charter schools. However, fewer studies address specifically why a certain demographic. In this case, young, high-performing educators are moving to charter schools. This begs the question, why are these educators stopping their work in traditional public schools, right, where they might have been placed or hired first, and actually leaving to go to charter schools, which, to be honest, in the educational landscape, are fairly new, right, about 30 years old, if that? So what I want you to do now is to go ahead and take about 2 minutes, and I want you to silently reflect and or jot down the answers to these 2 questions. In this part of the presentation, I actually have my committee stop what they're doing and actually sort of answer these 2 questions. Okay. So now that we've had an opportunity to sort of think through these questions, I actually want you as a committee to go ahead and discuss them amongst yourself. Let's take about 3 minutes and then we'll come back together, whole group. At this point in the presentation, I actually asked the committee to do sort of a turn-in talk. This is a teacher strategy. We use it in classrooms all the time. I thought it might be interesting to have the committee sort of reflect and discuss it amongst themselves. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and actually come back. I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are. Okay. And so at this point, the committee sort of comes back together, and I'm going to kind of probe and see what their thought process was before jumping back into my presentation. Now, I really want you to take a look at this image. These individuals are the people I trained with in 2010. Each of them is a Teach for America core member. I would say maybe 80% of us were placed in a traditional public school and spent at least 2 to 3 years working there. However, after being labeled highly effective in those respective districts, 60% of us went on to work in a charter school. And so for me, this phenomena is highly personal. But it begs the question, what do we do about this? And for me, this research exists to affect the policy. I think about the implications, both for charter schools and traditional public schools. If we figure out why this demographic is leaving, then traditional public schools will be able to tailor their policies to keep this demographic. They'll know what will attract these highly effective and young educators. And at the same time, charter schools will know more clearly what they're already doing to retain, or rather to attract and then retain young, highly effective teachers. What this looks like for me is districts literally rewriting their manuals in terms of the benefits they offer teachers, the salaries they offer teachers, as well as any other perks or even just how they appraise teachers. And for me, my hope is that this research will open up more avenues for questioning and then actually have school districts start to think about how they will continue to attract and hopefully retain some of these bright, young, highly effective educators. Now, in thinking about this project as a whole, it was absolutely necessary for me to dive into existing literature. And so for the next couple of minutes, I wanted to go ahead and share with you what I've sort of found after poring over these different studies. As far as charter schools in general, they've given teachers a lot more opportunity and choice as far as what to work. And various studies sort of chronicle this, right? How in the last 30 or so years, teachers are sort of free to choose their own adventure, right? There are charter schools that specialize in a ton of different programs, in addition to magnet programs and traditional public schools and the private settings. And so I think this issue of choice is one that comes up in the studies already, but might play a big role in my particular study. Salary and benefits was another category that was well researched. And for the most part, what was found is that while charter schools generally pay their employees less, they also have the freedom to pay select employees higher salaries. In addition to that, on average, charters are offering more untraditional benefits, right? For example, nutritional advice, yoga retreats, daycare, etc. Last but not least, various studies have shown that, at least in the areas of professional climate and curriculum concerns, charter schools offer teachers more flexibility, more freedom, and because of that, teachers tend to be more satisfied working at a charter school. So what am I able to take away from this, right? Charter educators generally enjoy their professional lives more. They also have more freedom in what and how they teach versus traditional public schools. Charters also have more control over discipline procedures. And last but not least, with all this rapid growth of charter schools, it means more leadership opportunities, especially for younger educators ready to move up the career ladder. So let's sort of wrap this up, right? We know some things about charter schools. We know about their effectiveness, and we can pinpoint generally why teachers leave the educational field. But there is a missing piece of the puzzle. Specifically, why are young, highly effective teachers moving from traditional public schools to charter schools, right? The literature gives some big general ideas, but we want to get specific. And I think that the research study that I've chosen to conduct will help us get there. And so for this dissertation, I went with a qualitative research paradigm. And my thought process here was I needed to get down and dirty with these educators and find out exactly why they were leaving traditional public schools. And so I wanted to get in their natural environment. My role as a researcher also matters, right? I'm part of this demographic potentially. But I also knew that I had to get multiple sources in terms of information, and I wanted to frame this as a holistic account. In thinking about that further, I realized that for this one, it was best for me to go to a qualitative multi-case study. Now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about my role here. First and foremost, I myself was a highly effective and young educator in a traditional public school, right? So I can speak to that experience. But I also worked in the charter world and had tons of colleagues who spent even more years than I did working at various charter schools in all parts of the country. And last but not least, I've spent the last couple of years honing my skills as an educator for teachers. I can't divorce myself from any of these roles. Instead, I think it was important for me to embrace these roles, use it as an opportunity to build relationships with the people affected by my study as well as the people in my study potentially, and hopefully use my experiences here to drive deeper and more probing questions of my subjects to really elicit the responses that we would need to draw definitive conclusions about why these particular highly effective and young educators made the decision they made to go to a charter school. So the data was collected, right? And the setting here for the most part was charter school sites in the city of Houston, coffee shops, and a few other work sites. As far as the group that I chose, I had a participant group of about 25 teachers under age 35 who had already been labeled highly effective by the Houston Independent School District and then went on to move to a charter school. And from this participant group of 25, my advisor and I used various criteria to narrow it down and choose our 5 subjects for the actual study. The data was then gathered via field notes. Whenever we talk about research projects such as this, it's also critical that we understand that we need to address issues of validity as well as reliability. And so my data will be triangulated through the use of multiple sources, and the goal here is to establish similar themes. And then last but not least, I'm going to make sure that non-researchers look at the study as well, right? This opportunity to peer debrief will make sure that other people are sort of pulling out the same conclusions that I'm drawing.